February 14, 1942. Harvard University Chemistry Laboratory, 3rd floor. A match flickered in Professor Louis Fieser's hand. He touched the flame to a sample of jellied gasoline spread across a metal tray. The fire didn't behave like ordinary fuel. It clung to the surface. It burned with unnatural persistence. It refused to die. Fieser leaned closer, fascinated and disturbed. The gel adhered like rubber, combusted like petroleum, stuck like glue. He reached for his laboratory journal. Aluminum naphthenate combined with aluminum palmitate creates gel consistency, he wrote, his hands steady despite what he knew was coming next. This discovery would reach across an ocean. It would clear caves carved from volcanic rock. It would consume cities built of wood and paper. Professor Fieser set down his pen and reached for the telephone. What he had created on Valentine's Day would become the most devastating incendiary weapon in history. The Pacific War had taught American commanders a brutal truth. Japanese soldiers did not surrender. They fortified volcanic islands with networks of caves and bunkers that conventional weapons could not destroy. Iwo Jima contained 11 miles of tunnels through solid rock. Okinawa's defenders had transformed ancient burial tombs into machine gun nests. Artillery bounced off. Bombs barely scratched the surface. Naval bombardment proved useless against reverse slope positions. The Marine Corps needed something that could flow into caves, penetrate bunkers, reach into the deepest fortifications. They needed fire that would not stop burning. Professor Fieser had spent decades studying organic chemistry. Born in Columbus, Ohio in 1899, he had devoted his career to synthetic compounds and blood research. When war erupted, he was synthesizing rubber alternatives for military vehicles. He opposed developing poison gas. Chemical warfare violated his scientific principles. But when his country called, Fieser swallowed his objections. The weapon he would create seemed almost elegant in its simplicity. Mix aluminum soaps with gasoline. The result was a substance that combined petroleum's combustibility with adhesive properties that made it cling to any surface. Water could not extinguish it. Rolling on the ground only spread it further. The gel burned at temperatures exceeding 1200 degrees Celsius. It consumed oxygen so rapidly that victims in enclosed spaces suffocated before flames reached them. The first field test occurred on Independence Day, 1942. Fieser transported 45 pounds of his compound to Harvard's soccer field, located between the business school and the athletic stadium. Cambridge Fire Department personnel stood by nervously, hoses ready. Tennis players practiced on nearby courts, oblivious to what was about to unfold. Fieser positioned the gel in a shallow pool of water. He wanted to demonstrate that this substance would burn even when submerged. A white phosphorus igniter triggered the reaction. The gel erupted into flames that splashed across the water's surface, burning intensely despite being surrounded by liquid designed to extinguish fire. Flaming droplets arced through the air. The tennis players screamed and fled. Fire personnel watched in amazement as the gel continued burning underwater, defying every principle of conventional fire suppression. Fieser had succeeded. His compound achieved what no previous incendiary could accomplish. It stuck to surfaces. It burned in conditions that would extinguish ordinary flames. It could be projected in streams rather than exploding in uncontrolled fireballs. Military production began within weeks. The compound received its designation, napalm, from the chemical components naphthenate and palmitate. By mid-April 1942, Napco Chemical Products was manufacturing a brown powder that looked harmless in storage but transformed into something terrifying when mixed with gasoline. The Chemical Warfare Service ordered production scaled up immediately. Dow Chemical constructed new facilities. By 1943, monthly production reached 500,000 pounds. By 1944, that figure had climbed to 8 million pounds. America's industrial capacity was being mobilized to produce incendiary weapons at unprecedented scale. The M69 incendiary bomb was engineered specifically for napalm deployment. Each bomb weighed 6.2 pounds and contained jellied gasoline that would spray across a 15-foot diameter when ignited. 38 M69s were packed into an E-46 cluster bomb. When dropped from altitude, the cluster would separate at 2,000 feet, scattering individual bombs across the target area. Each bomb created a pool of adhesive flame that burned for 6 minutes. The mathematics of destruction were compelling. One cluster bomb could incinerate an area 100 feet by 300 feet. A formation of bombers could blanket entire city districts with overlapping fire. Napalm saw its first combat use in Europe during the Allied invasion of Sicily in August 1943. But the weapon's true test would come against Japanese fortifications that had proven impervious to every other weapon in the American arsenal. The volcanic islands of the Pacific offered ideal defensive terrain. Cave systems provided natural protection. Coral and volcanic rock formed materials stronger than poured concrete. Japanese engineers had spent months preparing defenses that they believed could not be breached. July 22, 1944. Tinian Island, Mariana Chain. Captain Robert Johnson of the 2nd Marine Division observed Army Air Force fighter bombers approaching from the east. The aircraft carried bombs unlike any he had seen before. These were the first napalm weapons to be deployed in the Pacific theater. The Japanese garrison on Tinian, commanded by Colonel Ogata, had constructed elaborate defenses. The 50th Infantry Regiment and supporting units, nearly 9,000 men total, had excavated caves into coral cliffs overlooking every beach approach. Machine guns covered interlocking fields of fire. Artillery positions were hidden in reverse slopes where naval bombardment could not reach them. For weeks, Marines on nearby Saipan had watched Japanese positions withstand massive bombardment without significant damage. When the napalm bombs fell, everything changed. Orange flames rolled across fortified positions like a liquid tide. The incendiary mixture flowed into cave openings, poured through firing slits, seeped into bunker ventilation systems. Japanese soldiers who had survived weeks of conventional bombing fled their positions with uniforms aflame. The burning petroleum adhered to clothing and skin. Stop, drop and roll, the technique that extinguishes normal fires, only distributed napalm more widely across the body. Water from canteens caused it to spatter rather than extinguish. The only escape was to abandon positions entirely and face Marine rifle fire in the open. Marine Corporal James Chen, observing through field glasses from Saipan, recorded in his diary that evening. The Japanese came out of holes we did not even know existed. They rolled on the ground trying to extinguish flames, but the fire would not stop. Some ran toward the ocean, leaving trails of black smoke. Within days, Marine units were requesting napalm strikes before every advance. Fortified positions that had required hours of costly assault to neutralize could now be cleared in minutes. The psychological impact was immediate. Japanese troops who had shown no fear of conventional weapons fled at the first sight of napalm. Tinian fell on August 1. Of 9,000 defenders, only 313 survived to be captured. The success on Tinian demonstrated napalm's potential, but it was just the beginning. Marine Corps weapons specialists recognized that portable flamethrowers achieved similar effects at close range. The M2 flamethrower could project thickened fuel up to 40 yards, but operators who carried 70 pounds of fuel on their backs became priority targets the moment they revealed their weapons. Casualty rates for flamethrower operators exceeded 90% once they engaged enemy positions. The solution came from Navy construction battalions who modified Sherman tanks with Ronson flamethrower systems. These Zippo tanks, as Marines nicknamed them, could project burning gel up to 150 yards while providing armor protection for operators. 8 such tanks landed on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. February 23, 1945. Iwo Jima. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams dragged his M2 flamethrower through volcanic ash toward a Japanese pillbox. His unit had been stopped by interlocking machine gun fire from concrete emplacements. Artillery had failed to destroy them. Naval gunfire had accomplished nothing. Direct assault meant certain death. Williams could see the barrel of a Type 92 heavy machine gun protruding from a firing slit barely 8 inches wide. Bullets sparked off the fuel tanks on his back. 20 yards. 15 yards. At 10 yards distance, Williams triggered the igniter. A stream of jellied gasoline shot through the narrow slit. The bunker interior became a furnace. Temperatures exceeded those of industrial crematoriums within seconds. The concrete itself began cracking from thermal shock. Steel reinforcement bars warped and melted. The machine gun barrel turned red, then white, then began to sag. Williams moved to the next position. This was a larger complex with multiple chambers connected by passages. He noticed a ventilation shaft barely 6 inches in diameter. The flamethrower nozzle fit perfectly. One sustained burst sent flaming gel flowing through the entire underground system like liquid death, seeking every passage, every room, every hiding place. Japanese soldiers emerged from hidden exits 50 yards away, their bodies wrapped in flames that could not be extinguished. Some collapsed after a few steps, the fire still consuming them after death. In 4 hours of continuous combat, Williams personally neutralized 7 major fortifications. Positions that had stopped an entire Marine regiment were cleared by one man with a flamethrower. He would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions on Iwo Jima, but he rarely spoke of that day after the war ended. Lieutenant General Tadamaki Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander on Iwo Jima, had spent a full year preparing the island's defenses. His 21,000 troops had carved miles of passages through volcanic rock. They had stockpiled ammunition, food, and water for extended siege. Kuribayashi had studied American tactics extensively. He understood their reliance on superior firepower. He positioned his artillery on reverse slopes where naval guns could not engage. He forbade wasteful banzai charges, ordering his men to fight from fortified positions until death. He believed he had created an impregnable defense. He had not anticipated napalm. The modified Sherman flame tanks arrived on the second day of battle. Captain Frank Caldwell of the 26th Marine Regiment watched the first Zippo tank advance toward an underground fortress that had resisted 2 full days of assault. The tank's flamethrower erupted, projecting a stream of burning petroleum 100 yards into the cave mouth. The incendiary mixture flowed like water, following every downward slope, filling every chamber. The entire hillside seemed to exhale black smoke. Then Marines heard the screaming. Japanese soldiers emerged from caves no one had known existed, their uniforms and flesh burning. Those who made it outside were shot down by covering infantry. Those who remained inside were incinerated or suffocated. The fortified complex, which military planners estimated would require a week to clear using conventional methods, was neutralized in 20 minutes. The 8 flame tanks on Iwo Jima consumed 10,000 gallons of thickened fuel per day. Each tank required a dedicated support team of construction battalion personnel for maintenance and refueling, often performed under direct enemy fire. Electricians mate Joseph Klein and shipfitter Patterson worked around the clock to keep weapons operational, repeatedly exposing themselves to machine gun and mortar fire to service tanks between assaults. The psychological effect on Japanese defenders was profound. Radio intercepts revealed growing panic in enemy communications. Terms like demon fire and dragon tanks appeared in decoded messages. Private Toshio Yamada, one of the rare Japanese survivors from Iwo Jima, later testified. "We were trained to die for the emperor. We accepted death from bullets, artillery, even bayonets. But fire was something beyond comprehension. It came into our caves like a living creature. You could not fight it. You could not hide from it. It found everyone." By March 1945, napalm had proven so effective in tactical operations that General Curtis LeMay made a decision that would alter the war's course. If incendiary gel could destroy caves and bunkers, what could it accomplish against cities? LeMay commanded the 21st Bomber Command, responsible for the strategic bombing campaign against Japan. He had struggled for months with high-altitude precision bombing doctrine. Jet streams over Japan pushed bombers off course. Cloud cover obscured targets. Anti-aircraft fire at 30,000 feet was devastatingly accurate. Results were minimal. Factories continued production. After assuming command in January 1945, LeMay concluded he needed to try something radically different or face relief from command. The mathematics of urban destruction were compelling. Tokyo's residential districts consisted of densely packed wooden houses with paper walls and straw mat floors. Japanese war production had been dispersed into thousands of small workshops integrated throughout residential neighborhoods. High-altitude precision bombing could not target these distributed facilities. But area incendiary bombing could destroy entire districts, eliminating factories and workers simultaneously. One incendiary cluster bomb could incinerate an area 100 feet by 300 feet. 300 bombers could blanket several square miles with overlapping flame. March 9, 1945. 5:34 post-meridian. North Field, Guam. Operation Meetinghouse. General Curtis LeMay stood watching as the first of 334 B-29 superfortresses began rolling down the runway. Each bomber carried 40 cluster bombs containing 1,520 individual M69 incendiary devices. Their destination was Tokyo. LeMay had made controversial decisions. He ordered bombers stripped of defensive guns to carry maximum ordnance. He directed them to attack at night at altitudes between 5,000 and 9,000 feet. Lower altitude would improve accuracy and place them below effective range of most Japanese anti-aircraft batteries. The reduction in defensive armament troubled his crews, but LeMay insisted. The risk was calculated. The potential results justified everything. Pathfinder aircraft arrived over Tokyo just after midnight on March 10. They marked a 3-mile by 4-mile residential district housing 750,000 people with incendiary bombs arranged in an X pattern. The main bomber stream followed, dropping 1,665 tons of incendiaries in carefully planned intervals that created a grid of overlapping fire. Within 30 minutes, individual blazes merged into a firestorm. Ground-level temperatures approached that of molten lava. Superheated air created winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. The winds fed fresh oxygen into flames while sucking oxygen out of bomb shelters and basement refuges. Concrete boiled. Steel girders melted. The Sumida River began turning to steam along its banks. Civilians who jumped into the water to escape heat were boiled alive. Tokyo Fire Department Captain Susumu Takahashi logged his final report at 12:48 ante-meridian. Fire beyond any possibility of control. Equipment melting and useless. The city is dying. Tokyo's fire department fielded 8,000 personnel and 1,000 pieces of equipment, but only 3 ladder trucks capable of reaching beyond 30 feet. They had trained for conventional bombing, prepared for normal structural fires. Nothing could have prepared them for this magnitude of conflagration. The gel stuck to their equipment, melting hoses and pumps. Water turned to scalding steam before reaching flames. Firefighters abandoned their stations and fled for their lives. By dawn, 16 square miles of Tokyo had been completely incinerated. Conservative estimates placed the death toll at 87,500. Though Japanese sources suggest the true figure exceeded 100,000. More human beings died in the Tokyo firestorm than would die in either atomic bombing. 1 million people were rendered homeless. B-29 tail gunner Sergeant James Carter reported. At 5,000 feet altitude, you could smell burning flesh inside the aircraft. Thermal updrafts from the firestorm were so powerful they threw our 65-ton bomber around like paper. Some crews reported seeing balls of fire rising thousands of feet into the night sky. General Curtis LeMay was just beginning. The systematic incineration of Japan's urban industrial base had commenced. March 11 brought destruction to Nagoya as 313 B-29s eliminated Mitsubishi aircraft engine plants and surrounding residential districts. 2 days later, Osaka's industrial core was consumed by flames that burned for 72 continuous hours. March 16 saw Kobe's port facilities and shipyards reduced to twisted metal and ash. In 10 days of sustained incendiary operations, more Japanese industrial capacity was destroyed than had been eliminated in 2 full years of conventional high-altitude bombing. The Air Force was consuming napalm faster than American factories could produce it. Emergency production facilities were established. Chemical plants that had manufactured cosmetics and industrial solvents were converted to napalm production. By June 1945, monthly output approached unprecedented levels. The tactical lessons learned from cave clearing in the Pacific Islands were being systematically applied at strategic scale across the Japanese home islands. April 1, 1945. Okinawa. If Iwo Jima had demonstrated napalm's tactical effectiveness, Okinawa would reveal its moral complexity. The island's 450,000 civilians were trapped between 100,000 Japanese defenders and 180,000 American attackers. The Japanese had fortified every cave, every tomb, every hillside. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had studied the lessons of Iwo Jima. His troops dug deeper, reinforced more heavily, and developed crude countermeasures against flame weapons. They installed water reservoirs in caves to create steam barriers. They constructed internal fire breaks and passages. They fashioned protective gear from wet cloth and mud. Every defense proved futile against petroleum fire that burned at 1200 degrees. The 713th Tank Battalion had been entirely converted to flame tanks for Okinawa operations. 54 Sherman tanks equipped with Ronson flamethrowers capable of projecting streams 60 to 80 yards. Naval chemical units had stockpiled 250,000 gallons of thickened fuel. Every Marine rifle company included dedicated flamethrower teams. The battle for Sugar Loaf Hill demonstrated how completely napalm had transformed tactical warfare. Japanese defenders had created mutually supporting fortifications on reverse slopes, immune to artillery and air bombardment. Marines of the 1st Division spent 3 days attempting to advance 100 yards, suffering massive casualties for minimal gain. On May 14, Marines implemented an improvised tactic born of desperation and ingenuity. They manhandled 55-gallon drums of napalm mixture to the hilltop, punctured them with rifle fire, and rolled the leaking barrels down slopes into Japanese positions. White phosphorus grenades ignited the flowing gel. The entire reverse slope became a cascade of liquid fire. Defensive works that had resisted for days were eliminated in hours. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, observing the assault, recorded his impressions. The Japanese came running from caves we had not known existed, their uniforms and bodies wrapped in flames. Some attempted to surrender, but it was already too late. The napalm had done its work. They collapsed after a few steps. The fire continued burning even after death. The moral complexity of napalm warfare became inescapable on Okinawa. Thousands of civilians had taken shelter in caves following instructions from Japanese military authorities. When flame tanks approached these positions, Marines faced impossible choices. On May 30, a patrol discovered a large cave containing 450 civilians near Shuri Castle. Lieutenant John Stevens of the 6th Marine Division attempted to convince them to emerge and accept safety. When they refused, citing Japanese propaganda about American atrocities, military necessity superseded humanitarian concerns. The flame tank crew gave 3 verbal warnings in Japanese. No response came from within. The flamethrower ignited, projecting its deadly stream deep into the cave system. Lieutenant Stevens later provided testimony. We could hear them screaming for approximately 5 minutes. Then silence. When we finally entered after the fire had consumed available oxygen, we found mostly women and children. The flames had consumed all breathable air before reaching many of them. Most had suffocated rather than burned. It was a mercy, I suppose, though that word seems obscene in this context. The Army Chemical Warfare Service meticulously documented every engagement. Flame tanks on Okinawa consumed 200,000 gallons of thickened petroleum. Underground fortresses that conventional wisdom said would require weeks to clear were neutralized in hours. Japanese strongpoints that had stopped entire divisions fell to flame tank sections. But the cost in civilian lives was staggering. Estimates suggest flame weapons directly caused at least 20,000 civilian deaths on Okinawa, though precise figures remain disputed to this day. July through August 1945. General LeMay's B-29s now conducted incendiary raids with mechanical precision and industrial efficiency. The target list had expanded from major metropolitan areas to smaller industrial towns. Intelligence officers identified 180 Japanese urban centers suitable for firebombing based on population density, industrial significance, and construction materials. By late July, 67 cities had been attacked with varying levels of destruction. The systematic campaign continued throughout the summer. Fukui lost 60% of its urban area on July 19. Matsuyama saw 75% consumed on July 26. Tsu suffered 85% destruction on July 28. Japanese industrial production collapsed under the cascading destruction. Workers refused to enter factories knowing they were priority targets. Transportation networks failed as rail yards burned. Food distribution systems broke down as warehouses were incinerated. Prince Kono, former prime minister, wrote in his private diary, "The Americans have identified our fundamental weakness. We built a civilization of wood and paper, elegant and refined. Now they are systematically burning it to ashes, city by city, and we have no defense." The Japanese military attempted various countermeasures. They demolished entire city blocks to create firebreaks. They constructed underground shelters with multiple emergency exits. They distributed crude protective equipment fabricated from chemically treated cloth. Nothing worked. The burning petroleum found routes into every shelter, every refuge, every hiding place. August 1, 1945. Military planners were preparing for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan's home island scheduled for November. Intelligence had identified 10,000 caves on Kyushu alone, along with 5,000 concrete bunkers and elaborate underground command networks. Conventional assault would cost an estimated 1 million American casualties. The solution was incendiary warfare at unprecedented scale. Plans called for 75 flame tank battalions totaling over 4,000 tanks. Chemical units would stockpile 5 million gallons of thickened fuel on forward bases. Every rifle company would include organic flamethrower squads. B-29s would conduct rolling incendiary bombardments ahead of ground forces, systematically clearing defensive zones. Under-Secretary of War Robert Patterson gave flame tank production the same priority classification as the Manhattan Project. The entire industrial capacity of the United States was being mobilized to produce weapons of fire. The invasion never came. August 6, Hiroshima. The atomic bomb killed 70,000 instantly. The world reacted with shock at a city destroyed by a single weapon. But Curtis LeMay was unimpressed. His systematic firebombing campaign had already destroyed 67 cities with cumulative destruction far exceeding one atomic bomb. Tokyo alone suffered more deaths than Hiroshima. The atomic bomb was spectacular theater, but incendiary raids had accomplished more cumulative devastation. August 9, Nagasaki. Another atomic bomb. Another city vaporized. But that same night, 95 B-29s dropped conventional incendiaries on Yada. The resulting conflagration burned for 2 days. August 14 witnessed the final major incendiary raid. Even as Japanese officials debated surrender terms, 160 B-29s attacked Kumagaya and Isazaki. Flames were still consuming both cities when Emperor Hirohito announced surrender the following day. In his radio address, the emperor mentioned a new and most cruel bomb, referring to atomic weapons. He made no mention of the weapon that had destroyed more of his nation than any other, the jellied gasoline that had incinerated 180 square miles across 67 cities, killed between 300,000 and 500,000 civilians, left 8 million homeless, and eliminated 40% of Japan's industrial capacity. Professor Louis Fieser returned to Harvard, to his chemistry laboratory where everything had begun just 3 years earlier. He had been awarded the Medal of Merit, America's highest civilian honor. His invention had shortened the war. It had saved hundreds of thousands of American lives according to military calculations. It had revolutionized modern warfare. He had achieved what few scientists accomplish, creating something that genuinely changed history's course. But victory tasted bitter. In 1967, the Vietnam War brought Fieser's invention back into public consciousness. He watched television news footage of napalm strikes against Vietnamese villages. Children running down roads, their bodies wrapped in flames. Civilians caught in bombardments meant for military targets. The weapon he had designed to clear fortified caves was being used against populated areas. "We never envisioned anti-personnel applications," Fieser would later state. "We focused on structures, fortifications, military installations. I have no moral right to judge napalm simply because I invented it, but I believe its use should be severely restricted." In June 1972, Fieser composed a letter to President Nixon urging international restrictions on napalm use. Edward David Jr., Nixon's science advisor, replied that napalm deployment was difficult to predict or control. The response offered only that the suggestion would receive careful attention. Fieser recognized it as dismissal. He died in 1977. His obituary in Harvard's official gazette mentioned his pioneering work on vitamin K and anti-malarial drugs. Napalm went unmentioned. The university had quietly erased the weapon from his official legacy, uncomfortable with the association between their institution and mass incineration. The questions Fieser grappled with remain unresolved. Was Tokyo's firebombing a war crime or military necessity? Were Okinawa's civilian deaths justified by strategic requirements? Did incendiary warfare shorten the conflict sufficiently to justify its horrors? Historians continue debating these questions without reaching consensus. Japanese survivors formed associations to document testimonies and preserve memories. Museums in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe display melted artifacts, photographs of devastation, endless lists of victims. School children learn about the night of black snow, when burning debris fell like dark precipitation across Tokyo. In the caves of Iwo Jima, coral walls still show scorch marks from flame tanks visible 8 decades later. On Okinawa, sealed caves contain remains of those who chose death over surrender to fire. In Tokyo, memorial parks mark neighborhoods that vanished in single nights. Professor Fieser's formula was elegantly simple. Aluminum naphthenate plus aluminum palmitate plus gasoline equals napalm. But the calculus of war had become chemistry, and chemistry had become industrial-scale death. The lesson was unmistakable. In total war, victory belongs to those who can produce the most devastating weapons and possess the will to deploy them without hesitation. Japan's volcanic fortresses, carved from solid rock and defended with suicidal determination, collapsed under American incendiary assault. The age of static fortification had ended. No bunker could withstand flowing fire. No cave was deep enough to escape petroleum flame. The warrior tradition that had sustained Japan for centuries died in the flames. Modern militaries worldwide studied the Pacific firebombing campaign as both strategic masterpiece and cautionary tale. The integration of tactical and strategic incendiary warfare demonstrated how a single weapon system could scale from individual bunkers to entire cities. International law attempted to address the implications through the Protocol on Incendiary Weapons adopted in 1980, which restricted but did not eliminate their use. Military necessity still frequently supersedes humanitarian concerns. For American veterans, memories of flame warfare remain difficult. Raymond Hart, who served on Iwo Jima, would only say the flamethrowers accomplished the mission. Eugene Sledge wrote that war transforms everyone into monsters. Woody Williams, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima, devoted his post-war life to supporting Gold Star families, rarely discussing the weapon that made him famous. For Japanese survivors, trauma persisted across generations. Children who fled through burning streets grew old with recurring nightmares. The smell of gasoline could trigger panic attacks decades later. Burn scars served as permanent reminders. Yet from this destruction emerged unexpected outcomes. The nation reduced to ashes by American firebombing became one of America's strongest allies. Cities incinerated by napalm rose again as centers of global commerce and culture. Tokyo, which endured the most devastating single bombing raid in history, transformed into one of the world's great metropolises. The same industrial capacity that produced weapons of mass destruction was redirected toward reconstruction and reconciliation. The war ended. The flames died. But the questions napalm raised continue burning. In the age of total war, there are no limits to human ingenuity in creating methods of destruction. The same industrial capacity that improves civilization can be turned to obliterating it. As the last survivors pass away, their memories become history. Destroyed cities have been rebuilt. Trauma has been processed across generations. But the capacity for such destruction remains, dormant but available. The Fortress Pacific burned, and from its ashes arose the modern world, forever changed by a weapon born in a university laboratory, tested on a soccer field, refined through industrial production, and deployed across an ocean of volcanic islands until it consumed an empire. The age of fire had come and gone, leaving questions that burn eternal.